Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started. This story begins with an orphanage where there are so many children with a hard fate. One little girl came up to an older girl and turned to her and said she couldn't sleep. The older girl's name was Dahlia, and she said she could climb in there and sleep that night with her, and asked if she wanted to hear another story. The little girl, when she heard this, was at once delighted, for she loved the stories from Dahlia best of all. When the girl began her story, she said that long ago, far, far away, there lived a servant girl and a young lord. They fell in love with each other, despite being from different worlds. The young lord helped the maid to become a real beautiful lady. He bought her many different expensive dresses, jewelry, and many other things. And the two of them, now a perfect couple, attended a ball together, where they danced the night away, paying no attention to anyone. Of course, everyone around them was very disapproving, and some even condemned their relationship. But their love defied all difficulties, and soon they were able to get married. That's how this lord and a simple servant girl were able to live happily ever after. When the little girl heard this little story, she was delighted. Then, laughing, she asked if she realized that it was just a fairy tale. Things don't always work out that way in real life. The girl rolled over to the other side and said that of course she knew that, because she was old enough to know the difference between fiction and reality. She was silent for a while, and then, turning to her, she said, "If you imagine that you realized that you really, really liked someone, however that person later became a high-ranking nobleman, what would happen then?" In fact, it was only a fleeting memory of Dahlia lying next to the man. He would lie down and hold her, and they would fall asleep together. But the girl suddenly had this thought, and she actually, when she was still in the orphanage, never could answer what she would have done in that place. The thoughts completely overwhelmed the poor girl, so she started to get out of bed. Her whole body was bruised and abrasion due to the intense exertion. Then Dahlia turned slightly to see if the man was still asleep. He in turn turned on his other side, but did not wake up. Then she gently ran some of her fingers over his face, savoring his soft and silky skin. The girl smiled at the mere memory of what had happened that night. She was afraid it would all be over quickly. However, she would have at least a moment in her memories. Mentally, Dahlia said goodbye to her master. She quickly dressed and ran outside to make sure no one noticed her. The girl also managed to take all her belongings and pack them in her suitcase. Then she ran fast for a while. But when she found herself in the forest, she was able to slow down. Dahlia walked with her feet on the crunchy snow. But suddenly she felt unbearably sad and cried. But she couldn't stop. She walked farther and farther away from her beloved master. But surely the story should be told from the beginning, and it all started 5 years earlier. This was the first time Dahlia had been able to get a good job as a maid at a prestigious estate, and she greeted all the maids by introducing herself. The girl, smiling, also said that this was her first day with them as a novice maid. So she really hoped she could be of service to them. Everyone immediately applauded. Then the head maid called for a maid named Thelma and asked if she could give Dahlia a tour of the property. The girl was in anticipation of something very good. She even felt as if she were in a dream, because she could not even imagine such a thing. She really couldn't have realized until now that she would now actually be working at the Jufgen-Schultz estate. This is the greatest estate in the whole kingdom, which belongs to one duke. The wages for the servants who labor in this place do not compare to the servants of other estates. And as long as Dahlia works continuously in this place, she will be able to fulfill her dream and return home with her sister, opening a flower store together. The girl thought about the fact that maybe this dream wouldn't turn out to be as unattainable as she had previously thought. And so as she stood there thinking about all this, a maid suddenly came up to her and asked her to come closer and look at something. Thelma, as the girl approached, said that what she now saw in front of her was the North Woods, and asked if she could see the roof behind the trees. Dahlia, looking more closely, did indeed notice a building of some sort, and the maid in turn explained that it was an outhouse, and that no matter what happened, no matter who said what, she should never go even close to it. And if a girl wants to work in this place long enough, she must follow this one rule. Dahlia was a little startled by this, but told Thelma that she understood, and thought to herself that she would definitely have to be more careful. She wants to work at this place for as long as she can in order to earn as much money as possible. That's why she decided to stop thinking so hard about this outhouse. But as soon as the girl got to work, the other maids who appeared in her way immediately asked about the outhouse, about who lived there, and various rumors about who was approaching it. Dahlia wanted to work just quietly, not thinking about anything. But everyone on the estate was just talking about this outhouse. In particular, there was also talk of a ghost who dwelt there. This nickname was given to the Duke's youngest son, who lives alone in this annex. There are also rumors of how disfigured his face is, or how cruel he can be to the rest of the people. Some assured others that he was definitely insane. Others said he was a criminal better not to be messed with, and each rumor was even worse than the last. Dahlia, on her first day of work, continued to do the job she had been assigned, and thought about the fact that it had absolutely nothing to do with her, so she didn't really go into all that much detail. The girl stood near the window and suddenly saw the roof of this outhouse. She thought about the fact that someone of her low rank had no need to even approach it, or much less see anyone from this building. Some time had passed since then, and she had already adjusted to working on the estate. And then one day the head maid asked that Dahlia go and take one package to the outhouse. When she heard that, she couldn't even say anything. And the maid in turn said that she could have asked Thelma, since it was always her doing it. But she wasn't at the manor right now. And the woman also fears that the only person she can trust with this most important task is Dahlia. The girl hesitated, and turning to Madame, said that Thelma had warned her not to even go near there under any circumstances. However, the head maid, when she heard this, waved her hand and said that it would be a fairly quick errand, but it couldn't be passed on to the other girls. The head maid said she had assigned this task to her because she was the only one who didn't gossip about anything, much less the outhouse. So the woman stepped back, telling her to be back in time for roll call and wished the young girl good luck. Dahlia had nothing else to do but obey her. So with all her fear and bewilderment, she set out into the dark forest to cross it and get to the outhouse. The girl went and was very afraid. Her hands were shaking as she carried the parcel, but she tried to reassure herself, saying that everything would be fine and she had nothing to fear. It was a simple errand, so nothing should go wrong, and soon enough she finally came to the paved path that led to just this house. The girl hesitated for a while whether she should go in, but then she knocked, and opening the door, entered the ominous outhouse after all. Dahlia didn't utter a single word. She walked slowly up the steps and to the correct door that the older maid pointed out to her. She then knocked on the door, telling the gentleman that she had come to deliver a package in Miss Thelma's place. Then a rough male voice was heard saying that she could come in. Dahlia opened the door slowly and with a creak, and apologized to Mr., saying she didn't mean to disturb him. But as soon as the girl went inside, she immediately saw this gentleman. He was simply beautiful, and she from surprise even froze in place. According to the stories of everyone on the estate, this was supposed to be the most dangerous and violent, terrifying man who had the nickname of the Ghost of the Outhouse. But as soon as the girl stepped inside, she saw a small and innocent-looking guy standing near the window with a piece of a puzzle in his hands. She immediately assumed that this was most likely the sinister Ghost of the Outhouse, which was an indelible stain on the Duke's legacy. He was a cursed bastard, and his name was Isaac Yufgen Schultz. The boy in turn smiled and said that this must be a very interesting sight for her. The maid, when she heard his voice, immediately returned to her senses, and still holding the parcel in her hands, inquired what he meant. Isaac smiled and said that the puzzle was called White Knight, and all the pieces were white, and it had taken him 2 whole days to complete it. At that moment, he pointed his finger at the puzzle, which was lying on the floor fully assembled. He caught a glimpse of the girl and asked if she thought he was rather handsome. Dahlia, who couldn't take her eyes off the man for a moment, was silent for a while, but then she agreed with him and said that he was very handsome indeed. She meant Isaac himself, of course, not the puzzle. That's how their acquaintance happened. The man sat down on the floor to run his hand over his creation and savor it once more. And the girl thought at this moment that she now guessed why everyone called him Ghost. It was as if his appearance was out of this world, and perhaps it was hard for many to realize how such a thing was possible. Then Isaac suddenly remembered the missing piece in his room and asked where the book was. The maid immediately diverted from her musings and, holding out the parcel to him, said that she had brought it. When she handed him the package, she bowed and said that if that was the end of it, she would probably be on her way. But as soon as she saw Isaac unpack the package and noticed the cover of the book, she couldn't contain her surprise and asked, "Is this really Treasure Hunt, Part 2? And so, when Dahlia heard her voice coming from that room, she immediately became embarrassed. She covered her mouth with her hands, for she was not allowed to say it. The master in turn looked at the maid in surprise and asked, "Can she really read?" Dahlia wanted to quickly come up with something to justify herself, but then realized she could only get punished for it. So she told the truth, which she knew how to do. He in turn inquired in surprise, did she somehow go to school? But the girl replied that unfortunately she had not been able to attend. However, the girl said that her little sister loved it immensely when she read to her some of the books that the bookstore nearby had thrown away. She always asked Dahlia to do it, and the girl herself was quite happy to fulfill such requests of her little sister. So she learned to read on her own, to comfort her in times of need. Isaac, when he heard this touching story, smiled and said that it was quite impressive, because learning to read on his own would not be possible for everyone. He looked at the girl and also said that surely her parents must be very proud of her. Dahlia, when she heard the mention of her parents, put her head down and felt a little sad, and after a short silence, she said in a quiet voice that perhaps that was the way it would be. The man felt immediately uncomfortable, for he realized that her parents were not in this world anymore. So he immediately apologized to the girl, saying that he didn't know that, but Dahlia stood up for him and replied that of course he didn't know, so it was okay. He didn't have to apologize because of that. Isaac became a little uncomfortable, but he said he wasn't going to apologize, so he decided to change the subject so that there would be no more awkwardness like this. Guy stepped aside and said that meant that apparently she liked to read after all. Walking over to his huge bookshelf, which had many copies of various books on it, he said that she could borrow any books she wanted from this place. Dahlia might consider it something like my apology for being so awkward. The girl looked at him in surprise. She couldn't believe her happiness, for she was madly in love with books herself. Well then, glowing with joy, she thanked the Lord for the opportunity and said it was incredibly important to her. The man, for his part, could not take his eyes off her beautiful beauty. He had never seen such intelligent and beautiful maids before. Dahlia was silent for a while, but then said that she was sure all the books in this place were very expensive, and she didn't know if someone like her was allowed to take them off the shelves. The man became suddenly very serious, and realized that he had to get out of this situation somehow, so he did not answer anything, but only went to the shelves and began to type a lot of different books. The maid looked at him in surprise and asked what he was doing. Isaac replied that he had read them all a long time ago, and they just stood in his study as decoration. So it will be so much better if someone gets them again to read and immerse themselves in the world of the most beautiful stories. Dahlia felt too awkward, and thanking the gentleman again, said that with all due respect, she had to give it up. Then the man came very close to her, and holding out some books, replied that it was all right. She should not give up her pleasure. Handing the girl the books, he immediately asked her what her name was. Dahlia was so surprised that she remained silent for a while. Then she introduced herself, and when the guy heard her name, he smiled and said goodbye to her to come again. It was well into the night when the girl was finally able to return to the manor. She was still holding the books he had given her, and she was surprised at what had happened. In fact, out loud, he was just a terrifying man. But the one she'd met in the outhouse was the perfect opposite of that. The man she saw there was elegant, kind, and generous enough to lend books to incredibly expensive maids like her. And now, as Dahlia walked back to the estate, looking at those beautiful spreads, she smiled and couldn't believe her happiness. She wouldn't even be able to call this man a ghost. He was more like a real angel. At this very time, Isaac began to piece together his big white puzzle, thinking about how everyone either hated or feared him. However, there are those who look down on him as if he means nothing in this world. It should have been the same with the girl who had come to see him that day. Now, however, as he thought back on everything that had happened, he couldn't understand why it had been different. Those eyes that shone with joy, her beaming smile made him feel happy and important in this world, if only for a little while. Isaac, remembering this briefly, smiled And afterward, turning away from the window, which showed the night landscape, he could not understand what they meant. At that moment, someone suddenly came into his room and approached him. He said that he had seen someone leaving the outhouse earlier, and asked the gentleman if he was all right. The guy glimpsed at him and replied that he was fine, so he needn't worry. He explained that it was just a maid who had come by to bring a package, although it was quite unusual. Isaac said she was the first maid who could withstand his gaze, looking him straight in the eye. So he said that this girl was probably new to something and hadn't yet had time to learn about all the rumors that were going around. When he thought of her again, he smiled, then turned to the governess who had been helping him on the estate and said that they must be sure to do something. He got to his feet and said that for some reason, he was sure he could take one servant girl to him, and asked the man if that was correct. The governess, when she heard this, became wary, and Isaac, in turn, said that he wished to approve some candidate for the place. The next morning, the head maid came to Dahlia and informed her of her new position. She couldn't believe that she was now in charge of the entire outhouse. However, the woman said that Sir Isaac had personally asked for her nomination. The previous maid, who had visited the outhouse in the morning, broke the news. Dahlia was so surprised that she couldn't even say a word, and the older maid replied that from now on she would be the one to do all the work in the outhouse. But she wouldn't have to do much after all. It wasn't that hard. The woman then shifted her gaze to Thelma and asked if she was correct in saying all this. The maid, who had been standing and working in the outhouse until then, agreed with her. Then the maid smiled and said that was very good, and also asked that Thelma tell Dahlia everything she needed to know and do, and return to her duties afterward. The maid bowed and said she was done. Dahlia bowed as well and said goodbye to her. And so as they walked out the door, Thelma turned to the girl, telling her to follow her. Dahlia was still a little confused after hearing the news, but she agreed and went straight for the maid. With her head down, she didn't know what to do now. The only place she'd been told to avoid if she wanted to stay in the job long enough was the outhouse. However, now she has become more than just working at the place, so there's also a head maid and was. When she and Thelma had gone a short distance away, the girl immediately wondered if something had happened in the outhouse last afternoon. Dahlia looked at her and replied that not at all. It was nothing like that. She had just carried the package and that was it. The girl also addressed Thelma, saying that she would like to stay working there as long as possible and doesn't know what to do now, since it wasn't her fault that she was assigned there. Thelma was thoughtful and silent for a while, and then said that she understood that the girl had met Sir Isaac. Dahlia, in a voice trembling with fear, confirmed this information, and the maid in turn asked, "What was it like?" The girl was a little surprised by such a question, but she said that he wasn't at all like everyone was talking about him. She was even quite surprised when she saw him in person. Thelma replied in a calm voice that of course he was not a bad man at all, as everyone said. Then the girl asked, "How come there are so many horrible rumors about him?" The maid explained that it was really about the Duchess and the Marquis. They hate Sir Isaac terribly, and the Marquis especially. It all began when Sir Isaac first came to this palace. Duchess practically threw him out to live in the outhouse, not wanting him to even be near them, and the Marquis could not relax until in various ways he had ceased to torment poor Isaac, who was still quite a child. At this point, the girls had already gone outside, and Dahlia asked in surprise, did they really hate each other that much? Thelma said that it's not often you see a noble family that can welcome an illegitimate child with open arms. And this, to top it all off, was also the Jufgen Schultz family, one of the most prestigious nobles in the entire country. She went ahead and said that the Marquis was going to arrive next month, so she should expect the sheer madness to begin after that. Thelma, also approaching the fence, told her to be careful not to get too close to Sir Isaac. Even with all her duties in the outhouse, she must keep her distance, for a sad end awaits anyone who messes with him. Dahlia sighed heavily when she heard this information. She was shocked, realizing that there was no way she could get out of this position. Before she left, Thelma said that since she was now running things in the outhouse, she should come in through this entrance, which was quite hidden from everyone. And in parting, the maid also held out a small box to her, telling her to take it, and also asked the girl if she thought she was up to the task. Dahlia, accepting her gift, said she could handle everything, so she shouldn't worry about it. But at that moment they were suddenly interrupted by the voice of another servant girl, who ran up to them anxiously and shouted, The maid started swearing at them, asking what they were even doing in this place, since they needed to get to the main entrance as soon as possible. Thelma stepped forward and asked in a calm voice what was even going on and why she was yelling like that. Then the maid said that the Marquis was coming very soon, so they should be there, for he would be arriving any minute. At this very time, a Marquis, his name was Maximilian, was riding in the wagon, and he was sipping alcohol from his flask to relax at least a little. Lady Carla was sitting next to him, and she told him to just try to take one more sip, and she would promptly throw that wretched flask out the door. The Marquis in turn defiantly took a flask out of his pocket and began to drink greedily. Carla said they don't even have an official break and all he can do is just drink, and that annoyed her the most. But the man didn't want to listen to her boring chatter. So he grabbed the book she was reading and threw it right out the window of their wagon. Carla saw this and became very indignant. She ran to the window and saw them moving away from her precious copy of the book, asking what was wrong with it. She turned to the carrier and asked that they stop the carriage now. But Maximilian pulled out his flask again and handed her a single piece of paper, telling her to read this first. He told her to just look at what that vile, illegitimate child had done while they were gone. Maximilian was sure that she herself would ask him for a drink and a trip to the outhouse after she learned all about it. At this very time, Dahlia ran with all her legs straight to the outhouse on the errand of the maid, who said that once the Marquis arrived, she would find it difficult to come there, so she must try her best. However, she also said that as soon as the girl finished, then she should definitely return to the main entrance. They would prepare to greet the Marquis. Thelma asked as she just tried to get back before his carriage arrived, and now she would have to hurry as soon as possible to catch everything. It took a long time, but the girl finally reached the outhouse. However, as she began to look around, she did not see the gentleman. When she looked around, she didn't see the gentleman. This pleased her, for she would not have to look for him for a long time. Dahlia immediately ran up to him, but suddenly saw that the strange man had grabbed him by the collar and was leaning him against the wall with hard blows. The girl, seeing all this, was very frightened, but decided not to interfere in their squabbles. After all, she is only a simple servant and does not know the whole situation. At this time, Maximilian, who had already arrived, tore up the piece of paper Isaac had sent him and asked who he even thought he was and how dare he enroll in the same school as him. He called him a vile, illegitimate child and said it was all part of his magnificent plan to embarrass their entire family. Dahlia took a closer look and realized she had seen his face in one of the portraits before, so she assumed it was probably the same Marquis. If that is indeed the case, then Sir Isaac will definitely suffer at his hands, for he is forbidden to fight back against anyone. The girl just watched how the guy tolerates all this abuse and humiliation, but thought that to obey such a bully is not cowardice at all. At that moment, Isaac looked away and saw the girl in the bushes. Then he turned back to Maximilian and said that he did not think he would dishonor their family at all. It would rather make them the greatest Marquis, who would disgrace not only the family, but the entire empire with his grades. When he said those words, he was incredibly pleased with himself and, smiling, said that it was certainly not his fault that he was so stupid. But still, these grades must be making his life difficult. Isaac also added that not to mention his predilection for gambling and even women. He even wondered what other noble families thought of the Eugen Schultz family. When Maximilian heard this, he got even angrier and swung his fist at the guy, calling him an idiot and various other words. But when Isaac saw the fist coming, he suddenly called out one name, namely Maya Obrick. Seeing the Viscount's surprised face, he told him not to even say that he had forgotten. After that, he gathered up the rest of the papers that the boy had torn and asked him to go back already. He also said that he thought the Duke had applied on his behalf without first warning him himself. However, Maximilian must be sure he would not agree to go to the same school with him, but would remain in the annex until his death. Then he glimpsed him and said with a cold note in his voice that it would be just as he wanted it. Maximilian smiled contentedly and said that he had managed to get away with it this time after all. However, the next time he crossed the line, he would not be so generous. With those words, the man simply walked away. Dahlia, seeing that he had moved far enough away, hid behind the trees so that at least the Lord wouldn't see her. To her surprise, however, It was Isaac who approached her from behind, asking if she was prone to sneaking around and hiding. The girl was very frightened when she heard the master's voice. She immediately turned to him and did not know what to do in such a case. Then an ingenious thought occurred to her, and she said that she was well aware that she had come at the wrong time, and it seemed that the two of them did not have the warmest of relationships. Isaac said in a detached voice that she could see it herself, for she was peeping. The girl said she didn't think the Marquis hated him. She said she didn't think Marquis hated him, because he and her younger sister were always fighting, but they still loved each other. This is the constant relationship between all siblings. Hate is like this kind of caring, and there is no way to avoid quarreling in the relationship. Isaac held out his hand for her to get out of the bushes and told her they had history and merciless bullying here. This place was quieter, as long as Max stayed in his dorm. However, every time his studies ended, all hell broke loose. Dahlia let him help him out, because it was really hard to get through those bushes. And at that moment the man pulled her so fast and hard by the arm that their lips almost touched by accident. Then he whispered in her ear that she would be quite wise not to run into Max. He had some really nasty habits, especially when it comes to maids. The girl stepped back a little to put some distance between them and asked what habits they were talking about. The man suddenly blurted out that it couldn't be. He's the heir to a ducal title, and he said that she must be thinking about it right now because he was so perfect, because he was from a powerful family. However, there is really nothing wrong with being a nobleman. They are just as human as everyone else. Isaac came closer and said that's right, just like the two of them, no different from regular citizens. In the evening, absolutely the entire family gathered around the big table to have dinner. However, Duchess Ermina started shouting loudly, asking if he had accidentally lost his mind. She appealed to her husband about Isaac. She did not understand how this child could be sent to a public school, or how he could think of sending him to a school for noblemen. Ermina yelled at him, asking if he didn't know when to stop. Maximilian, who was sipping wine and smiling, turned to his mother and asked her to calm down, for this was the statement he had torn to shreds and thrown right in the guy's face the second he arrived home. The Duke was the head of the family, and his name was Jaron. He cut off a piece of his meat and was incredibly angry. The man turned to his son, asking how he even dared to meddle in his own father's affairs. However, Maxim could also stand up for himself. He started shouting, saying that he did it because his father continued to violate the order of assigning ranks, and he wondered if he'd even thought once about how it would turn out on him if the kid actually went to the same school as Maxim. It was as if the man looked at him and asked if he really cared about that, because his grades were just shameful, and he thought the guy was already doing enough for himself and his reputation. Maxim kept yelling, asking if he had just decided he could send his second son and this illegitimate child to the same school to try to get good grades out of him. Was that really what it was all about? He asked his father if he was really going to make up a new application for him, since he would be tearing them up all the time. It didn't matter how many of them turned out. The Duke, turning to Maximus, said he had had enough. He must think of more than just himself. However, the boy got up from the table and said that Isaac had told him himself that he had no intention of enrolling there, so there was nothing to waste his time on such nonsense. After that, he just slammed the door behind him. The Duke was incredibly angry. He walked from side to side for a while, and then, turning to the couple, asked if someone would pour him another glass of alcohol. Ermina sighed heavily, and wondered why this was happening every time they met. She was insanely embarrassed. She turned to her daughter, saying that her father could be quite testy at times. He has the perfect legacy of a ducal title, and the woman just doesn't understand why he's throwing such a tantrum over a completely different boy. Then she asked that Carla go and check on Max, because at this rate, no one would show up for breakfast tomorrow. The girl sighed heavily, and said she didn't know if her visit to him would change anything. But her mother came up to her and put a hand on her shoulder, and said that they were twins, so she should at least try to talk to him. Carly had nothing else to do, so she listened to her mother after all, and after finishing her tea, went to him. Dahlia was already sitting in the servants' quarters, sipping tea and listening to the other workers talking about something. Of course, everyone was discussing what had happened at dinner. One of the maids asked what they were arguing about this time. The man who was working there that evening said he wasn't exactly sure, but probably about the ghost of the outhouse as usual. But it's pretty unfair that they have to suffer like this because of him. Dahlia at this point kept thinking about those words Isaac had said about aristocrats, that they were people just like them. In fact, they were supposed to take out more food with the table servants that evening, but they heard about the argument between Maximilian and his father. Suddenly, the girl was interrupted from her musings. It was Adina who was working with her. Dahlia immediately looked at her and asked what was wrong. The girl began to sit down beside her and said that Lady Carla's escort was short of manpower. So the girl suggested that she go together. It was, in fact, not only the worker Dahlia was with, but she was also her roommate. Of course, the girl agreed to Adina's suggestion, and they set off. On the way, the maid said that apparently Lady Carla was on vacation and wanted to stay longer. However, she had returned so quickly that some of her maids had stayed home. Dahlia looked at her friend in surprise and wondered what had made her suddenly decide that. The girl sighed heavily and said that the Duchess was changing the lady's schedule based on Marquis Max's plans, and she's the only one who can calm him down when he's furious, so it's probably all about that. In a whisper, Adina also said that she had probably just gotten back from calming his last tantrum, so they would need to be careful not to upset her accidentally. And so, when she knocked, she turned at once to Lady Carla, saying that the maids had come to help her change her clothes. For a while, the mistress didn't turn around and just stood there. Then she allowed them to come in and help them change. Upon seeing Dahlia, the girl frowned and said she didn't think she'd ever seen her before. Well, smiling, she fixed her hair and said that she was pretty enough, which was a shame. The mistress then asked that the girl state her name. Dahlia bowed and immediately did so. Adina at this point went over to get her new clothes and, turning to the lady, asked how on earth a woman who was beautiful in her own right could call an assistant beautiful, and surely she was just joking now. But Lady Carla, turning away, said, "Absolutely serious now, her new friend is pretty enough, but since she's pretty as a maid, it's only going to mess up her work, not help her. That's why she feels sorry for her." Dahlia looked down and said nothing, and Lady Carla asked that she should watch out for Max, for he would not rest if he saw a beauty like her. After that, the maids ran a few more errands. When evening came, they were finally able to return to their bedroom. Dahlia began to adjust the flowers that were on the table. A neighbor ran up to her and asked if she was all right, and asked her not to worry so much about what Lady Carla had said. The girl was silent for a while, then said she was actually fine, just a little puzzled by it. Adina, coming closer, asked if she was referring to their family disputes. Dahlia said it was quite true, for she had thought a rich family would be more peaceful. They have everything they could ever want, and she doesn't understand why they have to have these horrible arguments. A friend, when she heard about it, said that it's probably because they have so much stuff that they argue all the time. It makes them want more and more. Then she fixed Dahlia's hair and asked if she really thought money solved absolutely everything. Tha, smiling, said that she actually thought so, but Adina replied that the rich cry too, so it was best not to forget that. But at this point, the girl thought about the fact that still, if you have no money, no penny behind your soul, then how can a person maintain his dignity? Her younger sister Laurel has suffered from asthma since she was a toddler, and when her parents died during the war, the care fell on the shoulders of the not quite grown-up Dahlia. She was doing absolutely everything she could to make more money. Money was extremely important since she wanted to keep giving Laurel medication and proper medical care. After all, they needed to live together. And one day the girl wondered what would happen if she just died. It would be so much easier, ending her torment once and for all. But fortunately for Dahlia, she was quickly able to come to her senses, not realizing how she could have ever had such a horrible idea to kill her little sister. It was a crushing sense of guilt that haunted at the thought, but it also drove her to a new decision. Never again would she allow herself to think such a thing. The girl was going to do absolutely everything, whatever it cost her, in order to protect poor Laurel. That's why she must survive in this terrible estate, in which there are so many intrigues and scandals. Dahlia must survive the estranged relationship between the Duke and Duchess, the cold Carla, the intimidating Marquis, and even the Lord in the annex, who is called the Ghost. She must survive them all while remaining only a maid in their mansion to realize her goal. And so a whole 2 months have passed since then, A light hoarfrost has begun to appear on the trees, and all the leaves have fallen. When she had some free time, Dahlia texted her dear sister Laurel and asked if it had snowed yet and inquired how she was feeling lately. The girl really hoped that her cough hadn't gotten worse, and she texted her sister to remember to take her medication, and told her that she had some pretty good news. She wrote to her sister that all the maids would have a little vacation at the end of the year for a few weeks, so she would buy everything Laurel liked and come over to see her. So she asked that the girl try to stay healthy by then, and be sure to obey her teacher. At the end, she also wrote about how she loves and misses her incredibly. Some more time passed from that moment, and a friend, running into the maid's den, brought a letter from her little sister. When she heard about it, Dahlia was very excited, and she immediately started reading it. It said that she didn't have to bring gifts, and she wondered what time her train would leave. She wanted to find out in order to meet the girl together with the teacher. When Dahlia read the letter, she told her friend that she was writing that she was doing well. She also said that usually her asthma gets worse by winter, which is why she was so worried. Edina, who was sitting next to her to take a break, asked if she really did have asthma, but it could be quite dangerous if you weren't careful. Dahlia, smiling, said she planned to buy her a new comforter with her next paycheck, and she also said she needed to change her medication to a better one. The girl hugged the letter and said that she really hoped this winter would pass without interference. But then suddenly, she was interrupted by a very loud whistle and a gunshot. Edina immediately got up from the table and said it was all Lord. "He's coming again." The girl looked at her in surprise and asked if it was really the Marquis. The girl said it was absolutely, definitely him. Lately, he's been going into the woods for his daily hunt, and it's really just a furtive protest right in front of the outhouse. Walks around the forest during the day making all sorts of noises, and in the evening comes home and is always making a mess, and the maids and servants, as usual, have to clean up whatever he left behind. Edina sat back down in her seat and sighed heavily, saying that they barely had enough time to just sit around, and it was all because of that ghostly lord. Dahlia suddenly became sad and said that it wasn't like that. She understood the Marquis, of course, but it wasn't because of anything Sir Isaac had done. He didn't ask to be born out of wedlock, and he didn't ask to be taken into this family. The girl was indignant and said that she knew it very well herself, but still they were so tired that they would like a quiet life. At that moment, Thelma came to them, and turning to Dahlia, asked that she follow her. The girl immediately stood up and started walking over to her, saying goodbye to her friend, and telling her that they would see each other later. Edina said goodbye to her as well, and thought to herself that this girl was incredibly kind. She'd sided with Isaac and everything. At that moment, Thelma took the girl somewhere to the side, and Dahlia wondered if this was another task in the outhouse that needed to be done immediately. The maid replied that not at all. The girl would be cleaning now. The Marquis made it a point now to be anywhere near the outhouse is an indirect death wish, so they will move Sir Isaac's to the far room in the north wing of the main building. She handed her the detergent, saying that I was certainly not her lot. However, Sir Isaac stated that she was the one he felt most comfortable with. Dahlia didn't mind, and smiled and said that she understood perfectly, and replied to Thelma that she could definitely rely on her. Everything would be at its best, as always, but in truth, it was an incredible relief to the girl, for she had been worried that Sir Isaac would sooner or later get hurt like this because of the Marquis. She walked up to the room and knocked, and started to open the door, thinking about the fact that she hadn't seen Sir in a while. The girl knows she can do a good job cleaning and wants to make sure she meets his requirements. So when she walked in, she immediately greeted Isaac. While looking more closely, I suddenly noticed that the guy was sitting at his desk with a book on his lap, and he was sleeping. Dahlia walked closer to him and noticed that up close, he looked like some kind of doll. His skin was so pale and radiant, and his eyelashes were incredibly long and beautiful. She supposed he must be much prettier than most of the girls in the manor. But then a man suddenly spoke up and turned to her, asking if she could stop staring at him, since he was a little embarrassed. Dahlia, who hadn't expected him to wake up so quickly, stepped back and got really embarrassed. She was really embarrassed because she hadn't meant to do that, but she just couldn't take her eyes off him. She immediately put her head down and apologized to the man. He, in turn, sat down and replied that there was nothing wrong with it, He said that she must have come to clean up. The girl didn't even want to look at him and said that was right. But she thought to herself that Isaac must be incredibly angry with her because she had violated his personal boundaries. But he, in turn, with a smile on his face, stepped closer to her and asked if she would mind if he stayed and watched it. The girl even looked at him in surprise and asked what he even meant. But Isaac explained that he wanted to watch her clean up. Of course, she had no choice, so she agreed to this. Some time passed, and Dahlia finally finished. Isaac looked around and was surprised to see that everything was shining. The guy got close to the girl, saying it was very impressive, and he couldn't believe she had single-handedly left a spot. Dahlia was already finishing cleaning, so she was changing the bedding, and thanked him for the compliment. Dahlia, as she continued her work, thought she had put out a lot more effort than usual, because she was incredibly embarrassed about what had happened a little earlier. She was also contentedly interested in why he wanted to watch her clean, for she had never seen a nobleman who was interested in the cleaning process. Isaac stepped closer to her and asked her how long she had been working on the estate. Dahlia, continuing to do her work, smiled and said it had been almost 3 months, and he wondered if she had worked as a maid before that. The girl confirmed that this was correct. She had been staying with the Duchess of McFawn for about 6 months and was also working there. Isaac asked if that was really true, as he had heard that she had quite a temper. Dahlia sighed heavily, remembering her time in battle, and said that, unfortunately, the rumors were true this time. It was practically a hobby of hers to take it out on all the maids. She could scream all the time and even hit them. Most of the maids didn't even stay there for a week. Isaac wondered and wondered how she'd even stayed there for 6 whole months, and most importantly, why. Dahlia explained that her little sister is still in the shelter and has asthma. She works to pay her medical bills. When the man heard this, he said he understood and added that she had some family after all. The girl continued to do her work and said that she certainly had parents, but they were gone during the war. Isaac, hearing about the war, was very surprised and asked if she was referring to the civil war in Wublan. It was hard for Dahlia to talk about it. It was hard for Dahlia to say it because she kept having flashbacks, but she said it was absolutely true. But her voice was no longer cheerful, and she didn't want to talk about anything else. The girl realized that because of all this talk, the atmosphere had suddenly become very heavy, so she decided that she shouldn't have said anything and wanted to apologize for her behavior. But then suddenly Isaac spoke first, saying with a delighted voice that she was indeed something extraordinary. He had heard that the civil war in the city had been particularly brutal, and absolutely no one had been spared. But somehow, she and her little sister had survived. He also said that she was probably just a baby back then, and he can't even imagine how hard it is to lose both parents and raise a little sister from a young age. Dahlia, thinking about it, said that it was really incredible and very hard. But at that moment the man said with regret in his voice that she was working so hard, and he admired that. The girl became very uncomfortable with the way he was complimenting her, and she said she doubted she was the only one who had faced such a thing because of the war. She knows that if you suffer long enough, you will be rewarded, as the saying goes. That's why she's doing it now. Isaac, hearing this, said that she was a pretty positive thinker, and he wondered if he worked just as hard, if something good would happen to him too. Dahlia, smiling, immediately turned to him and said that of course it was bound to happen. The guy also smiled back at her. Then she thought about how Sir Isaac was completely different from the other nobles. He is genuinely interested in the humble maid's feelings, her daily duties and problems. He gives voice to such deep thoughts that she has never heard before. The girl knew he was a completely different person, especially in contrast to the rumors that had been circulating about him. Soon she finally finished cleaning up, and before she left she told my lord that everything was ready and hoped he would have a quiet day. But Isaac stopped her before she was about to go out and asked her to wait, and inquired if she had already finished the book he had given her last time. Dahlia was very surprised to hear this because she still had a few pages to go. Then she felt embarrassed, blushing, and thought that he must think she had stolen the book and was not going to return it. So she said in a trembling voice that she would go back to the main building and bring the book right away. When she realized that she had misspoken, Isaac replied that he didn't mean it, and she shouldn't be in a hurry. He also said that he was just curious, because he would like to talk about the plot. holding out his hand to her. He said that if she didn't mind, could she come back tomorrow at the same time, and he could lend her another very good book. Dahlia, hearing this, exhaled with relief and said that she would be very happy and grateful to him for this. As Dahlia walked out and closed the door behind her, she said they would see each other tomorrow. She left him alone after that. However, she was insanely embarrassed. As soon as she came out, she sat down on the floor and covered her face with her hands, feeling her face burning. Dahlia couldn't believe she had just made herself look really stupid. She should have just kept quiet and cleaned the room like she was supposed to. But no. For some reason, she started talking to him. But then suddenly Adina, who was passing by, came up to her, and seeing her, asked her in surprise what she was even doing in this place. Dahlia was a little surprised and even confused when she saw her. Then, in a whisper, she asked what she was even doing here. The girl in turn explained that it was her turn to look after this wing and the corridor that day, so she would like to hear her explanation about it. And she also wondered why she was suddenly blushing so much. But Delina quickly told her to be quiet. The girl wondered why she had to do that, since she didn't think anyone was eavesdropping. But suddenly the two girls heard footsteps nearby and a loud creaking sound. They immediately ran behind the wall to hide so that no one would see them. Some time had passed since then, and Adina looked out from around the corner and said it was clear. Whoever it was gone. Dahlia was finally able to breathe. For all this time she had been holding her breath with excitement. Then the maid turned to her, saying that now she wanted to talk, and asked her what she was doing there. Dahlia offered to discuss it all in the evening when they were alone, and when it was time to go to bed, the girl explained everything to her roommate. And when Adina heard this, she screamed and asked if she was really responsible for taking care of the ghost. The girl, indignant, asked her to express her thoughts less loudly. The girl immediately apologized, saying that she had not expected such a response. Dahlia in turn said that Thelma really wanted her to keep quiet about it and keep it a secret, so she asked her friend if she could keep the information secret. Adina, seeing how worried her friend was, said that of course she wouldn't tell anyone, because that's what friends are for. She wouldn't let her down for anything. Dahlia smiled back, but then suddenly the girl said in thought, worried about the footsteps they had heard then. Dahlia said it was actually clear to her too that the man wore heels, so it could very well have been a maid. Then it turns out there were as many as 2 people, most likely Lady Carla or the Duchess. Adina, as she lay on the bed, said she hoped it was Lady Carla, for the Duchess would come to their heart's content if she knew they were there at all. Dahlia, anxious, asked what they were to do, for they were to clean the outhouse, to come if Sir Isaac called them. The girls pondered for a while, and then a friend suggested one very good idea. Dahlia was very much enjoying their plan of having Adina in the hallway to keep watch while she cleaned Sir Isaac's room herself. But they never heard those footsteps again, and for a while they forgot all about it. But one day, Sir Isaac even began to give her some simple tasks. It happens every time she doesn't have to clean his room. For example, last day he asked for a fresh stack of papers, and this day he asked for a bottle of ink. Certainly the girl was even sorry he hadn't asked for it all at once, because she wouldn't have to risk coming to him every time. And so, when she had already knocked to drop off the things she needed, the man cheerfully replied that she could come in. He was sitting at a small table playing chess. When Dahlia came in, he smiled and said he'd been expecting her to come. The girl, coming closer, said she had brought him the ink he had asked for. The boy took the ink, thanking her. Then he held out the book, saying it was for her. He said she had told him that she loved adventure stories, and when the girl heard that, she straight up glowed with joy and thanked him for being so generous. Isaac in turn asked her to share her opinion the next time she came to clean. The girl hugged the book and said she would definitely do so. And so another half a month passed. She was always doing his errands, and afterwards she received a token of gratitude. Various books, which she liked to read very much. As she headed off to the other wing to fulfill her other duties, she was suddenly very curious as to what book he had given her this time. But at that moment Carla's voice suddenly came, turning to the girl, saying that she had told her to stay away from Max, hadn't she? Dahlia immediately stopped and looked at her in surprise. There in turn, she asked what she was doing, begging someone even more dangerous. The girl immediately said hello to Lady Carla, but the latter, smiling, said she could relax. It was just the 2 of them. She asked another maid to bring her something she could wear over her outfit. Lady Carla, waving her hands, said that she knew perfectly well that she looked foolish. After all, it had only been a few days since her debut, and she was already being seen dressed like this. She even feels like they're going to sell her while she's still popular in the market. But the maid smiled and said she thought she looked just fine. Carla, smiling, said that she was quite sure that men would definitely drool at the sight of such a dress. After all, it would be strange if it turned out otherwise, since it shows so much skin. Dahlia was a little embarrassed, so she put her head down. But then suddenly Mistress made her raise it, and said that in any case, her mother would be furious if she ever found out. Lady Carla asked Dahlia if she really wanted to just be chased off the estate. Her voice was stern and serious. Dahlia was so frightened that she began to tremble. Lady Carla asked if she knew why Isaac was called a ghost. And it's not at all because he lives in an outhouse all alone, or because the air gets cold everywhere he goes. It just devours anyone it can get its hands on. Anyone who sympathized with Isaac or cared about him would disappear or die. Lady Carla also said that Max and her mother had seen perfectly well all of this, so she had warned the girl about everything. If she still wanted to continue their relationship with him, she wouldn't unconditionally stop her. However, she advised making sure the maid didn't let anyone else know about it, because this house was as messy as Max. Carla also said that she would prefer that no more problems come to the surface, because she is so tired of it already. Then the girl turned and walked away, leaving Dahlia all alone with these thoughts. Even the birds, who were nearby and singing their songs, scattered in different directions. One of the chicks suddenly flew into the territory where Isaac lived. It landed on his balcony, and then ran inside, sitting on his desk. The bird whispered something to him quickly, and Isaac, listening carefully, smiled and said he had no feelings for her. As he looked closer, Isaac thought of the bird's brown feathers, for they were so similar to the color of Dahlia's hair. He reckoned that if he dressed her in a nice dress, made her hair nicely styled, there was no doubt she would be much prettier than Carla, and he was very curious as to why this girl was being so nice to him, since she probably already knew all the rumors that were going around about him. At that moment, he took the chick in his arms and thought about what would happen if he took her for himself. What would she do then? But at that moment, Isaac let go of the chick, who quickly flew away, because he was very frightened of him. Suddenly, the Duke came into his room without knocking. The boy immediately stood up and said hello to His Highness. He was very surprised to see his father and asked him what he owed his visit to. The man came closer to him and said that he couldn't get his thoughts together, so he needed a little break, and asked if his son would be willing to play at least one game of chess with him. Isaac, of course, did not mind, for he was very fond of playing chess. Many hours had passed since that moment. It had already gotten dark outside, and the boy had beaten his father again. The Duke sighed heavily, looked at the chessboard and said that he had completely forgotten about one piece. Then his son asked him if he wanted to play another round to get even. But the Duke, rising from the table, replied that he had had enough. He was even a little tired. And after that he looked at his son for some time without taking his eyes off him. Isaac started to leave, saying that it was too late, so he should get some rest. Isaac said he would be sure to do that, and his father walked out, slamming the door. In fact, the Duke is called the Conqueror Herman, the hero of the Republic, and when Isaac first learned that it was all his father, he was even bemused for a moment. He wondered what it would be like to be the sword that protected him all the time. However, as could be seen in these circles, he was called an unwanted illegitimate child, so all his dreams and hopes were dashed. He is only occasionally useful in reminding his father of a lost love, namely Mother Isaac, and he even wondered how long his father would keep coming, missing this woman. But at that moment the boy suddenly felt a strong headache that he couldn't explain. He got up from the table and began to slowly make his way to the bed. He almost fell a few times on the way, but he managed to climb in. He was sweating because of the effort it took to get to the bed, and so as he lay there he thought about it. He used to think that he would forget what had happened in the past, but he had never been able to do so. Then he even wondered if she would come the next day. Perhaps if he saw her angelic face, he would feel a little better, and his headache would lessen. With these thoughts, the boy fell asleep. The next morning, all the maids began to gather in the dining room with a bow, In order to set up for breakfast, Dahlia, as she put the plates on the table, thought about the fact that those steps when she had first visited Isaac had belonged to Lady Carla after all. But she realized that she would absolutely need to see from Sokka. Perhaps she would ask Telmo to make an exception or speak directly to Adina. But at that moment, just then, a friend ran up to her and shouted her name loudly and hugged her, asking if she'd heard yet. Dahlia hadn't expected such an encounter, so she almost didn't even drop her plates. But when she was able to steady herself, she wondered what she was supposed to hear about. Adina said admiringly that they would have hairy crabs from the North Sea for dinner. The girl was a little surprised, not understanding why she should be so delighted and excited about it. But the girl said, whatever she said, that she had never tasted those hairy crabs. Dahlia replied in a quiet voice that she had eaten big crabs before, but her friend interrupted and immediately said that it wasn't like that at all. So she had better shut up now and look at this beautiful sight. The girl at that moment pointed her finger at Telmo, who was also waiting admiringly for her portion of crabs. Dahlia was surprised when she saw the look on her face. She hadn't even known that Thelma could have such an eager expression on her face. Soon, all of a servant brought out a crab each, and a friend, running up at once, gave her a portion, telling her to try it immediately and tell me how she liked it. Dahlia, when she saw these crabs, was very surprised. She could not believe that it must be delicious, for they looked very disgusting. But Adina, for her part, had already started pulling off a crab leg at a time and gobbling it up, saying it was incredibly delicious. Dahlia just stared at it for a while. Then she decided to try the crab herself, to see for herself whether it was good or not. And so, afterwards, when Dahlia went to Mr. Isak to clean his room, she delightedly began to tell him how her day had gone. The girl said that she had even dreamed about the crabs the night before. The boy listened to her admiringly, sipping his coffee, and when the girl finished her story, he asked in surprise, did she really dream about hairy crabs? Dahlia answered that it was absolutely true, and that she and her sister had been on the beach in her hometown. And people were dancing around, and after that they gave each of them huge crab legs, so they were all spinning in a circle and very much full of these seafood. When Isaac heard this story, he began to laugh out loud, asking, were those crabs so delicious that she didn't even dream about them all night long? The girl replied that of course she had never eaten something so marvelous before. The man, in turn, said that as far as he knew, and hairy crabs were a rather rare treat, and he assumed that something good had happened on the estate, since they had prepared such a dish. Dahlia, smiling, said that it was all just thanks to Lady Carly, because ever since she made her debut, everyone around her has been trying their best to deliver her gifts, and perishable food goes straight to all the servants and maids. Isaac, hearing about it, said that since it was all Carlo, he was sure her suitors were lined up as far as the door, and hairy crabs were the last thing they could give her, though he wasn't sure how excited she was about it in the first place. Dahlia, in turn, moved closer to him and asked him if he liked crab. The man only waved his head in refusal. She, hearing this, was very surprised and asked, "Is it really so?" She said that he knew they were good, and there was nothing better than that. Isaac explained that he just didn't like them, that's all. He didn't care much about food. Dahlia laughed and said that she was used to eating whatever she could get her hands on, so it was an unforgettable experience for her. She didn't know that such delicious food even existed, and this dish made her forget all her worries and problems even for a second. Isaac was suddenly surprised and asked, "Is she really worried about something?" Dahlia suddenly realized that she had begun to speak too much and started stretching out her words, embarrassed. She immediately remembered Carla's words, so she couldn't tell him what she was really worried about. Then Isaac, seeing her frightened face, said she shouldn't tell if she didn't want to. He didn't insist. Then he was silent for a while, and after that he added that he did not want to go into details. However, something not the best thing had happened to him too. However, when he talked to her, he felt much better. So Isaac simply says that if she ever wants to discuss anything, she can feel free to do so, and be sure to contact him. If it wasn't even now, he could certainly listen to her and even support her later. Then Isaac suddenly asked if perhaps she would like to be given more hairy crabs instead. When the girl heard this, she was very happy and said that would be wonderful. But the man, smiling, said that there is actually a dish much tastier than these crabs. After all, when he sees how pleased she is with them, he wants to let her taste them. Dahlia, stopping in front of him, said she was a decent, chaste young lady, so she would not eat everything she saw. Well then, smiling, she also added that if he suddenly offered her something, she would gladly accept and would not miss such a wonderful opportunity. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. Without knocking, the Viscount suddenly ran into the room. He even kicked the doors with his strong kick. Dahlia, when she saw this, was immediately frightened, for she remembered Carlotta's admonition to her that under no circumstances should he be caught in sight. Maxim, for his part, stepped closer to the room and wondered what this maid was suddenly doing in his room. He, coming closer to Isaac, said that he thought he wasn't interested in women at all, but after all, he was a very ordinary man after all. The guy immediately got up from the table and asked when he was going to stop assuming everyone around him was like himself. Isaac stood in front of the girl, defending her in this way, and said that his room was dirty and needed cleaning, which was why the maid was here, and nothing more. Max, with a sly smile, said that of course that was the whole reason, but then also added that he must have actually been very timely. He then threw the filthy sack containing the slaughtered animal on the floor, and turning to the maid, told her to take care of it. Dahlia, seeing this, was very frightened, and she could not even say a single word out of terror. The Viscount, in his turn, explained that a herd of rabbits was grazing near the outhouse, and so he decided that they would be good for dinner, and for that reason he interrupted them all for a delicious meal tonight. The girl, when she heard all this, trembled with fear, but the man, angry, pointed his weapon at her and said that the Viscount had just given her an order, so she must be quick to carry it out. But then suddenly Maxim took a closer look at the maid and said that he hadn't seen her before. Isaac couldn't stand all this sadness. He walked over to the girl and shoved her toward the door and shoved her out there, telling her to go away. And as he closed them behind her, he shouted rudely that she was lingering in his room. Dahlia was very surprised at this behavior and said she had to take care of the bag, but the man looked at her with a cold, angry, and arrogant look and said that he was telling her to leave, so she must obey that order. He thought to himself that he would take care of it himself. Dahlia was incredibly surprised, for she had never seen him in such an angry mood before, but she dared not bicker, so she obeyed him. When the man closed the doors behind him and Maxim laughed, asked if he had just taken her and chased her away, because after all, he could have asked for a roast to be cooked. Isaac was so angry that he was ready to tear those doors down, but he smiled and turned to his brother and said that the roast was a pretty good idea. When lunch came, the girl sat with the rest of her co-workers, but she couldn't touch the food, because she kept remembering what had happened in the morning. Dahlia, when she was just cleaning the man's house, wondered if he wasn't lonely living in an outhouse, separate from everyone else. Isaac, for his part, replied that not at all. He had Hoover and many other animals who sometimes visited him. The girl, when she heard about the animals, immediately asked for more details. Then the man said that one day he had fed rabbits he had seen in the neighborhood, and the next time he saw them, they had settled in the shed as if it were their own house. When she heard about it, she was very surprised, and said that it was hard for her to even imagine how they were doing there. But the man laughed and replied that he would be sure to show it to her next time. And the moment Dahlia saw the whole bag of dead rabbits on the floor, she froze. For anyone who sympathized with Isaac or cared for him was missing or dying. The girl couldn't touch her food and kept thinking about him, for she wondered how he was doing and if he was all right. But then suddenly her friend noticed that she was eating absolutely nothing, and turning to the girl, asked if she was all right. Dahlia, taking a bite of her bun, replied that she was fine. She was just a little tired, so she couldn't concentrate. But Adina cried out excitedly, telling her to cheer up, for in just a few days she would have a vacation. The girl was surprised, for she had completely forgotten about it, and said that it was contentedly closer than she had thought. Then she began to eat her shelf in small bites and thought about her vacation, and so some time had passed since then. The girl came again to Isaac's house to bring him a new parcel. There was a book and 2 bottles of ink, which he had asked for. The man thanked her, and then noticed her appearance, and said she looked rather tired. Dahlia was surprised to hear that. She said she was fine. Then the man asked if he remembered correctly that her vacation was already starting the next day, and wished her a good rest and strength. The girl smiled and thanked him. She realized that when she returned from vacation, it would be New Year's Eve, and the Viscount would return to school, which means Sir Isaac will be living in his annex again. He has a servant there, so it's unlikely he'll be calling on her as often as he does now. Dahlia actually wants to protect him, at least for a while. She's just a simple maid, of course, and can't do much, but she doesn't want him to feel lonely when she's around to help him. At this point, she started pouring him some tea and told him it was getting cold, so she offered to brew him a new one. The man said she shouldn't do it. After all, he had something important to discuss. Then he set the cup on the table and immediately put it in the small nightstand, taking out a letter from there. Isaac approached the girl, and holding it out to her, said that there was something he would like her to do. He wrote it down on a piece of paper. When Dahlia was about to open it, he asked that she not do it yet, but do it later when she got on the train, and asked if she was willing to do so. The girl was a little surprised when she heard this, but she still agreed. Then the man said that he had no more wishes, so she could go now. Dahlia was still surprised by the whole situation, but thanked him again, and as she walked out the door, she heard him ask where the orphanage she wanted to visit her sister was. The girl stopped and at once named the place where he was, and the man, when he heard it, replied, after thinking about it, that it was quite a long way off. Dahlia didn't understand why he was saying all this and asked if something was wrong, but Isaac smiled and said that everything was fine, so she could just forget it. He was thinking out loud just saying it. Then he closed the door behind him, wished the girl a good journey and a good rest of her vacation. As he left, she thanked him again, and she thought about the fact that they would see each other again when she finally returned. The next day she quickly packed her things and went to the train station. Dahlia was quickly able to get her bearings and took an empty seat in the car. When she heard the announcement that the train would be leaving, she decided to open the letter the man had given her. When she did, she was incredibly surprised. With trembling hands, she began to open it, and when she saw something golden, she immediately realized that something was wrong. The girl didn't expect there to be money in the envelope. She quickly hid and closed the envelope, looking around so that no one would notice it and try to steal it. Dahlia thought about the fact that she would have to work hard for 10 whole months without a break to earn that much. So she opened the letter, thinking of the errand for which he could pay so much. It said that it was a small allowance for her vacation. He also apologized for giving it to her like that, because he thought she wouldn't accept it if Isaac tried to put it directly in her hands. He also said that apparently the last encounter with Max shook her up pretty badly, so he's afraid that's all he can offer her as an apology. When she saw that, she thought it was too much. But then she read on and saw that Isaac had just written that she must be thinking the same thing herself. But since he can't leave the estate, he doesn't need such things. So he wants her to spend the money as she sees fit, and when she returns, to be sure to tell him everything in detail. He wants to know what she ate, what she bought. He will enjoy listening to her extensive stories later. So Isaac asked that she accept the money for his sake. After all, this way the story will be even more interesting and longer. The girl, after reading this letter, immediately put it to her breast. She was incredibly grateful to him and thought that he should take care of himself while she was away. And so, as she drove down the frozen road, she kept looking out the window, thinking about her sister, the estate, work, and of course, Isaac. When it was late evening, the girl finally reached the orphanage. Laurel ran to her and hugged her sister, greeting her with joy. Dahlia was also incredibly happy to see her, but then suddenly started scolding her little sister, asking her how many times she had told her not to run since it was causing her to cough. Yes, indeed she was. Laurel had started coughing incessantly, and the cold made it worse. But she told her sister that she had been waiting for her since morning, so she couldn't help but run. After that, she took her to the shelter, telling her to go to dinner. Some time had passed since then. The girl laid out all her things, and they finally went downstairs to the rest of the children to have dinner. Dahlia brought several interesting things with her. The first thing was, of course, candy, which she treated all the children present at the orphanage. They were incredibly happy and delighted. And so, when the sisters were finally alone together, The girl began to give her other gifts. She gave her clothes and a new toy. But Laurel was very surprised to see all this, and said that it was too much, and she did not understand where the girl got so much money. She said all that stuff and candy was incredibly expensive, so she shouldn't be spending so much. But Dahlia, smiling, said she certainly didn't need to worry about that, and asked if she remembered saying she was serving a lord on the estate. The girl waved her head cheerfully in agreement. Then she explained that he was the one who had given her the money to spend in this place. Laura looked at her sister in surprise and wondered if she really meant that smart, sweet man. Dahlia, smiling, said it was exactly like that. He is a great listener and even lets me borrow some of his books to read. He has a beautiful voice, and the way he speaks, he's incredibly kind and polite. And if you look closely, he even looks like a doll. When my sister heard all this, her face lit up with joy, and running up to her asked if he was her type. Dahlia, hearing this, was very surprised and even blushed with embarrassment. But then she began to say that she didn't mean that at all. She just wanted to say that he was good-looking and kind at heart. Moreover, she doesn't understand how someone like her could like someone so high-ranking as him. Laurel sat down next to her little sister and looked at her in surprise, asking in what way. Why couldn't she like him? After all, she's contentedly kind, pretty, and good at what she does. She was sure the master might like it too. But her sister, smiling, waved her head and asked that Laurel should not say such nonsense again. It was certainly impossible. But the younger sister still kept up and asked what about that incident. Didn't Jenny from the candy store marry that high-ranking marquis? And she was much prettier than Jenny. So it was possible, but Dahlia interrupted her halfway through and said it was too late, so it was time for them to go to bed. The little girl was a little surprised, but still listened to her big sister and led her to the bedroom. But her head was really full of thoughts about Jenny. The girl actually married a marquis she met at the orphanage, and everyone knew her story. It was a hurricane romance with a marquis, a rise in status through marriage, a story many young girls dream of, became a reality for this Jenny after all. In fact, reality is different from fairy tales. A girl in late pregnancy had to go to a nearby slum to find shelter there. She single-handedly gave birth to her child and left the place. The postage stamp on her farewell letter, which they eventually received from the girl, was sent from another town, Anka. Anka, by the way, was the capital of the corrupt women of the empire, so Dahlia wasn't about to equal that woman and follow her example. In fact, this girl was not the only victim. There was Angela, Milena. There were many girls in the orphanage who dreamed so much about love. However, their name ended up being manipulated as if they were nothing more than disposable toys of the nobility. Just because they were orphans didn't mean they could be treated that way. Dahlia knew that very well. But the girl was also fully convinced that Sir Isaac was quite different. He had gone through a difficult life labeled as an illegitimate child, and the girl was pretty sure he knew what it felt like to be left like that, always behind. And one can only be sure to see how he treats maids like her. She is sure that if he likes someone, he will treat that person with all sincerity and regret. Even if this person will be lower than him in social status, he does not think that such people are worse than him, and vice versa. He is ready to cooperate with them, listen to their advice and help them. Dahlia, at that moment, began to imagine various scenes, and she felt very uncomfortable. She immediately sat down on the bed, not sure what she was thinking about. Just because Laurel had said all those things to her, she couldn't sleep now. But at that moment, she accidentally knocked over the envelope containing the money the man had given her. She quickly picked it up and put it back down, thinking that of course she had lied to her little sister. After all, she had bought all that money with the money she had set aside, just in case. However, this money was still quite important to her, so one shouldn't throw it around anywhere. Dahlia was going to save them for later. She wanted to thank Mr. Isaac sincerely when she got back, because not everyone would do such a thing. The girl lay back on the bed and thought about the fact that there was no way she could go back there empty-handed. She would have to give him something as a token of her gratitude. And so a few weeks had passed since then. The girl had finally returned to the manor after her vacation. Eden immediately met her and greeted her, saying she was incredibly glad the girl was finally back. Dahlia was glad to finally see her too, and said hello. Suddenly she ran straight to the stairs in her work uniform. A friend, seeing this, was very surprised and said she thought she had the day off until the next day and asked, "Why did she change her clothes?" The girl explained that she needed to see Sir and Sack quickly. She also said that she would soon help her clean up the manor in order for her to be free sooner. Edino, when she heard this information, immediately said that she shouldn't go there. He's not in that room. He's back in the outhouse. That was why she had to go downstairs and quickly run through the entire forest in a frig in order to present her gift. As Dahlia walked down the halls, she thought about whether he would like it. Undoubtedly, this thing she had bought was a bit old. However, it took her a very long time to figure out what to choose. Well, at least the girl from this thing could be sure he wouldn't be disappointed. She corrected the wrapping and went to the door and knocked, saying it was her, and asking Sir Isaac if she could come in. The man who was sitting on the veranda immediately said she could come in. Dahlia, opening the door, apologized for the inconvenience and asked how he was doing. But as soon as she got closer, she froze, for she saw the bandaged cheek on the man's face. The man smiled and said he was glad she was back at last. The girl was immediately frightened, for she realized that he had hurt himself in some way. And then she asked what had happened to his face in the first place. But Isaac waved his hand and said it was no big deal. He was just sloppy and tripped. So it was no big deal. However, Dahlia was unstoppable. She ran up to him and told him that the band-aid was incredibly large. It must have fallen off a lot, so she asked him to let her see it. But the man refused and said it was fine, and she shouldn't worry about it. Isaac decided to change the subject and asked how her vacation had been and also how her sister was doing. The girl knew right away that he had done it on purpose, and realized that if he didn't want to discuss it all, then apparently she would have to give in to him. So, with her head down, she said that the trip had gone well, and Laurel was fine too. She had grown so much since the last time the girl had seen her, so when Dahlia saw her for the first time, she was very surprised by it. Isaac, for his part, started to get up from his chair and said that if we were talking about height, he thought he himself had dramatically managed to stretch upward. When the maid heard this, she laughed and replied that it had only been a few weeks, so it was simply impossible. She wondered how much someone could grow in such a short time. But on the last word she stammered because a man walked up to her, and he was indeed much taller than her. Dahlia couldn't believe it and, surprised, told the gentleman that he had indeed somehow gotten taller, but she wondered how that was even possible. She also wondered how old he was, because she didn't know that people could grow so fast at a great age. But Isaac asked how old she thought he looked. Dahlia didn't want to play all these games, so she asked him not to languish. The man, in turn, replied that he was about to turn 15, and when she heard this she was very surprised, for he was much younger than she was. The girl at this point wondered if it was possible because he seemed so mature, but she never would have even thought that he wasn't even 18 yet. Isaac, in turn, changed the subject again, saying that she had been holding something in her hand the whole time, and wondered if it was something from this room. And if so, could he put it away? But the girl, laughing, said not at all. It was her present for him. At that moment, she held out a small wrapped box with a surprise she had specially prepared for him. But he was very surprised when he heard about it, and for a while he just stood there and watched. After that, Isaac quickly unpacked and saw what the book was. The girl explained that the cover was a little tattered, but the inside should be completely clean. Dahlia explains that she tried to pick the one that looked the most interesting. She realizes that it's nothing compared to the ones he's given her, so she would understand if he didn't want to accept her. But the man immediately waved his head and said that not at all, because he had wanted to read the book for quite some time. When she heard this, she was overjoyed and asked if it was really true. Isaac said that this is all true, and he is incredibly grateful. He also added that he can't wait to start reading it already. The girl smiled and said that she was incredibly glad that he liked the gift after all. But in fact, the man was glad himself. He pulled the book closer to him, hugging it to him. After that, they started downstairs, and Isaac wondered if she wasn't on vacation until the end of the day. If so, she should really go and get some more rest. And he also said that she no longer needed to come to that room. Dahlia wondered if he had really decided to move to the outhouse permanently. The boy replied that of course he had, and he had already moved back in a few days ago. Before he left for good, the girl turned to him and told him that if he needed anyone to run any errands, he could be sure to let her know. Isaac smiled and asked if she was sure about that. But the girl said absolutely. After all, it was her job, so she would be fine with it. Then he came closer to her, and laughing answered that he had not expressed himself quite as he intended, but he decided not to broach the subject further, and said that in that case they would see each other in the annex. As he walked through the forest, he thought about the gift the girl had given him. Isaac began to look at all sides of the book. He had never had trouble getting the things he needed delivered to the estate. However, it seemed to be the first time he had ever been given a gift, and it made him feel incredibly good. He really couldn't wait to read this book, because he found it quite interesting, and he wanted to talk it over with the girl. But the moment he decided to go back to the manor already, he heard his mother's voice behind him, who said that she had already heard that he had returned to the Fleetel, and wondered why he was walking around the manor then. She wondered angrily how many more times she had to tell him not to show his face when she was here. Lady Carla, who was behind her, turned to her mother and said that he must have forgotten something. And besides, he had the book in his hand, so he must have been following it. But the woman, coming closer to him, said she had already warned him several times to leave this bow business alone, for it would be bad if he ran into one of the manor's ghosts. Carla started to defend him, saying that she knows it's hard for the maids to serve him, but she'll report it to the head maid, so she'd better just turn a blind eye this time. The woman, as she passed Isaac, said quite contemptuously that it was just an incredible disgrace. She then headed back to the manor after her walk. The man made no reply. He stood for a while longer, and Lady Carla glanced at him briefly before going back home. Soon he started to pass by the forest, and then suddenly he heard someone's footsteps behind him. He immediately turned the other way to see who it was, and Carla suddenly appeared in front of him, and he looked at her so surprised and asked her what she wanted. The girl was silent for a while. Then, looking at his bandaged face, she asked if Max had made that wound. Isaac said that if she had come to give him a few blows too, he would take them and go home at last. Except that he wants her to finish soon and leave. The girl started to follow him and said that she had no intention to do him any physical harm. Isaac then turned around and started to walk away, saying that in that case he just wanted her to leave. But the girl suddenly got angry and told him to stop pissing Max off, and asked him what good he thought would come out of provoking him all the time. Isaac glanced at her and said that she must be missing something. Max had started it first, so the boy had nothing to do with it. He explained that he was angry because Isaac's proposal had been discovered to have been chosen during a family gathering. But the only thing he himself had done so was to mutter a few phrases in reply to His Excellency during a game of chess. He had no right to be angry at a conversation he wasn't even in any way present at. But Carla replied that she wasn't talking about that, of course, and inquired about what he'd said to him later, in person. She said he had threatened him with a certain doom of mine and wondered if it was true. She couldn't stand it and started yelling, asking if he doesn't know how angry the guy gets every time someone brings it up, so she asks him not to do that to him again. Carla said he didn't know anything because he hadn't seen him after, and she's always responsible for putting Max in order. Isaac turned around again and said that it all sounds like it has nothing to do with him, so he asked that she not waste oxygen on him and go back inside. But the girl ran up to him and grabbed his arm and said that not at all. It was about him too. If he made Carla uncomfortable again, she would make sure that she did the same to him. The man pretended not to understand and wondered who he was talking about. But Carla replied that of course she was talking about Dahlia, the girl who visited his chambers almost every day. She's definitely sure he won't like seeing someone who cares about him suffer. But at that moment, Isaac suddenly intercepted her hand, saying that he knew full well that she was aware of exactly what he was capable of, and she knows why he has allowed himself to be manipulated by her and her family as they please. Why he, as the bastard child of this family, has never made any attempt to improve his situation. He squeezed the girl's hand so hard that it really started to hurt. But he also said that she understood everything perfectly well, and was a pretty brave girl, and wouldn't do anything stupid knowing all this information. Then he smiled and asked if he was right. She was silent for a while, then said that she was content to be manipulated. However, he wasn't thrilled with the way she was trying to take control now. Then in a quiet voice he asked that the girl listen to herself, for she didn't want to share the fate of Renvernos for sure. Carla was even angrier, and then she managed to wrestle his hand away. Isaac smiled smugly and told her to be careful on the way back. The girl only said in a quiet voice that he was just a monster. Surely he reminded her of a true bloodthirsty beast that spared no one. His appearance, when he acts helpless in front of the girl's mother and allows himself to be bullied by Max, doesn't match who he really is. No one knows Isaac's true colors. Soon afterward, Carla returned to her chambers. Dahlia suddenly came to her, bringing her the whiskey she had asked for. The girl glimpsed a glimpse of the maid, thinking that the thought of this monster favoring a girl like her was killing her. But Carla smiled at her at that moment and told her that it was very good that she had come, for she would have liked to talk in person. The girl thought about the fact that if she couldn't control the monster, her only option was to curb its master. So that's what she was going to do. In fact, Carla sometimes feels that everyone around her envies the life of the ducal daughter. But they don't know the price Carla pays for it, suffering under the oppression of the darkness that pervades their entire family. No one knows that she has to act as if she doesn't realize all the sins her selfish father commits in the name of family, that she has to turn a blind eye to all the lives her abusive family has taken, that Carla has to clean up the dirt after her brother after he indulges in his raucous pleasures, and finally, that she'll be sold to another rich, nasty, and dirty family as a bride for their offspring. Certainly Carla, like many, would not have wanted such a fate. But then she heard one day that they would have an illegitimate son in their family. Her mother even fainted. Max just ran away from home, but she was really happy for the first time. Carla was glad that there would finally be someone in this house who was more miserable than she was. She begged her father to let her see this boy with the guards, and in the carriage, of course, she was ready to take his side and downright adore, idolize him. And so, when the girl was still very young, she did come to the city of Ang, the lawless capital of the empire. Carla walked through the dirty and horrible streets and soon saw that Ren, the girl who had given birth to her brother, lived downstairs. With great difficulty with the guards, she went downstairs, and when she entered the house, she asked the man to wait for her at the entrance. She wanted to go there herself. As she walked past the filthy rooms, she could smell blood all around, and she even wondered what had even happened. Soon Carla arrived at the right door and without even knocking, opened it. The first thing the girl saw was a little boy looking at her in horror, beside the bloody body of his mother. He asked fearfully who Carla was, and she in turn looked at the corpse and realized it was probably Renee. So by deduction, the girl guessed that he was probably Isaac. She came closer to him and asked him if this was true, but the boy shook his head and said that it was not. When someone's cold and detached voice was heard behind him saying that he was Isaac, Carla immediately turned in his direction and saw the knife the boy delivered right to her face. He asked who she even was. His eyes were augmented by an unbearable stench at the same time of fear and despair, and he wondered who she was. Why act as if she knew him, since only Renee knew who he was? He wondered if she was with her. Carla looked at him more closely and noticed the blood on his knife, suggesting that he had probably killed poor Renee. Then the girl realized that she had to save the situation, and putting her hand on her heart, she said that she was his sister and also gave her name. She explained that she had come to this place to bring him home on behalf of their mutual father. In that moment, Carla realized that if she had revealed her identity a second later, she would have met the same fate as that woman on the floor. But the girl realized that before she could bring Isaac home, she had to deal with the whole mess. So Carla, in a way, knew better what was hidden beneath the mask of a man who pretended to be a helpless sign of an outhouse. She's a monster who doesn't understand the why question. But here's the thing. She's no longer the girl who can be easily manipulated. Family? She's all grown up and ready to stand up for herself and her interests. So now that Dahlia had brought her alcohol, she sat down next to her, and Carlo said she had heard she was one of the finest young maids on the estate, and wondered how long she had been working at the place. Dahlia said that she still has a lot to learn. However, she is trying her best, as she has not been working in this place that long yet. Mistress, for her part, said that she had heard that the head maid had praised her a lot. She said that her record is short. However, she is intelligent and good at manual labor. But the maid replied that it was all completely untrue, and she was probably exaggerating. But Carla told her to stop being modest already. I mean, she knows she doesn't throw compliments around for nothing, and then there's the whole Isaac thing. Seeing the frightened face of the maid, Carla smiled and told her to relax, because it was probably all because of her warning last time. She said so. She'd been watching the girl carefully lately and had changed her mind. She was not careless like the other girls after all, but more cautious. And Carla understood perfectly well why she had made her responsible for the affairs of the whole outhouse. Isaac, however, was a different matter, and she said, smiling, that he wasn't the kind of guy everyone said he was. Dahlia, when she heard about it, was immediately overjoyed and told the lady that he was very nice and kind, and she didn't expect him to be like that, since he was rumored to be some kind of villain straight up. Carla continued to smile slyly and said, "That's right, he's quiet and nice. The way he lives, however, is a disgrace on the whole estate. Not a single person he can call a friend. You can't come and go from this place at will." When the maid heard this, she hesitated and put her head down. When Carla saw this, she thought to herself that she didn't feel sorry for him, so she decided to go another way, and said she would like to ask the girl a favor, which of course the maid could not refuse. The next day, Dahlia came at once to the outhouse and met the governess from Isaac's meadow, and he, when he heard what she wanted, was very much surprised and asked if she really must go for a walk with him. Of course, he was very skeptical and turned around and walked back to the manor, saying that he wouldn't let her do that, so she'd better leave now. But Dahlia insisted and said that she would like to ask the gentleman about it personally, and perhaps he would like the idea. But the governess was not going to give in and said he would not let her anyway. At that moment, Isak suddenly came out of the garden and, hearing their argument, asked what was going on and why their faces were so serious. The maid, when she saw him, was at once pleased, and turning, inquired if he would like to take a walk with her through the town. To which the governess interrupted her and said that he had already told her that she must not do such a thing. If the Duchess found out, it would be very bad. But Isak paid no attention to him and asked if he could agree to walk around the city with her. The girl said that, of course, if it suited him, they would go right away. The man did not hesitate long and said that he agreed to such a thing and would gladly walk. When Hoover heard this, he looked angrily at the gentleman, not understanding how he could do such a thing. There was no turning back, however. The man said that he would change quickly, and Dahlia replied that it was no problem and that she would be waiting for him right here. In fact, the previous day, Lady Carla had given her orders and one item, namely the family crest. The girl explained that with one of these, any servant could leave the manor and return to it whenever they wanted. Dahlia, when she saw it for the first time, said it was too luxurious to take, but Carla, for her part, said she certainly doesn't hate the Isaacs, not yet, but she doesn't think their coming together is a bad thing. In fact, the girl just wants the maid to be careful not to get caught by her mother or Max. The snow is already beginning to melt and the flowers are blooming, so the boy should see at least the outside world outside the outhouse. Soon after that, they finally packed up and set off through the forest. Isakov kept looking around in wonder, but he liked to watch the clouds most of all. They walked a little farther, and the man inquired of the girl if this was the mountain called Giant's Ridge. Dahlia smiled. It made her feel very sweet to see the way he marveled at it all. And she said that it was actually really that mountain. Her peaks surely looked the same all year round, and the man in turn asked if it was true that snow could be seen there even in summer. The girl replied that it was quite so, and then she wondered if he had never seen her before. Isak waved his head and said that of course not, because he was always at home. He had only read about such things, and their town did have an incredible amount of mountains, so he was happy to watch them. Dahlia kept watching him enjoy the simple things like the mountains, nature, the things they are given to see every day. He's seeing it for the first time. As they were about to head onward, the girl suddenly saw that his scarf was starting to come undone, so she tightened it tighter. She said they still had a decent distance to go before they finally reached the city, so he'd better take her hand so he wouldn't get lost. And at that moment, she held out her frozen hand. But the man, when he saw this, immediately realized that this would not do. He immediately took off his glove and touched her cold skin with his warm hand, and said that they could go now. The girl was a little surprised at what he had done. But when Isaac smiled, pretending that everything was fine, she smiled back at him, and she felt calmer and even warmer, and so it took a long time. But they finally arrived in the city. It was the first time Isaac had ever visited. As the girl had expected, the first thing he wanted to do was visit a bookstore. Dahlia, looking at the map, said that there was an old bookstore in the market square near the fountain, and apparently it had been open for 120 years, so they could go there. But the moment she turned around, he was gone. The girl was very surprised, for she did not understand where he had gone so quickly. But then, behind her, she heard Isaac's voice wanting to go into the gift store. When she saw it, she was very surprised, but she couldn't help but obey him. When they got inside and the girl was finally able to get warm, on the way into town, the man also gave her one glove to keep her warmer. Isaac approached the saleswoman and asked if he could get the scarf they had hanging in their window. The woman said that of course he could do it, and then named the cost, but he in turn showed the badge of the imperial family. And when she saw it, she was very frightened. In a trembling voice, she apologized for not recognizing her lord at once, and asked if by any chance he wanted anything else. She also wanted to pack up the scarf before giving it to him, but Isaac said it was okay. He could pick it up anyway. They soon left the store, and the clerk thanked him for his purchase, saying that she hoped he would come back again soon. When they had moved a short distance away, Dahlia turned to him and asked if the object he had taken out of his coat was the one the man had used for payment. The boy replied that it was absolutely correct. It was his family plate. It's a sort of ID card. Apparently you can use it if you want to buy something. The bill for everything is sent directly to the estate later. Dahlia, when she heard this, was very surprised. She found it hard to believe that Carla had given her such a powerful object, and asked her to take care of Isaac. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't even hear the man calling her the first time. When he saw her frightened face, he asked if she was all right, and started putting on the scarf he had just bought. Dahlia was about to say something, but he smiled and said she just looked beautiful. The girl smiled and said that there was no such thing, and that he was too kind to her. She was about to ask something, when suddenly the man saw a horse-drawn carriage coming at her from behind. Isaac was madly frightened by such speed, but he was able to quickly move the girl away from that horse. The man put his arm around her and told her to stay close to him, because it might be too dangerous in the city. He looked her straight in the eyes, which were filled with fear after what had happened, and told her that the roads were too narrow, so everyone drove close enough. Dahlia didn't answer anything, but looked at him and smelled the scent of the fresh winter night, and it came from Isaac. Then the girl suddenly felt too uncomfortable, and she moved away from him. She decided to change the subject by pointing somewhere and saying that she saw a sign for a bookstore. She held out her hand for them to move on again, but the man put her over his elbow to make it more comfortable, and so they were closer, which made her feel even more uncomfortable. Soon they came to a bookstore and reached for the same book. However, Dahlia could not reach it, so the man helped her to do so. She thought he'd gotten just a little taller, but it seems he's even gotten bigger and stronger besides. When she had first met him, he had been incredibly pale and thin, but now he had managed to become a completely different person. Dahlia didn't understand how this could have happened in such a short time. She felt awkward all the time, so while they were in the bookstore, the girl tried to keep her distance from him. As evening began to fall, they finally went for another walk around the city. Isaac suddenly noticed something interesting nearby and told her to look there. He pointed to a small teddy bear that was on display and said it looked like any other teddy bear. However, it was wearing a very extravagant bow. Dahlia, when she looked in the same direction, said he was quite right. And then Isaac asked if she liked the bear. The girl replied with a glowing look that he was incredibly cute, and she thought he would make a great gift for someone. However, she thinks that they should already be heading towards the manor little by little, because the Duchess will notice that they have left it, and then it will definitely not be good for them. Suddenly, Isaac's good mood evaporated. He put his head down and said that he didn't care because it was obvious that she would scold him, yell at him, and hit him several times. And after that, it would all be over. She didn't understand how he could so easily talk about it at all. It meant that he was so used to physical violence that it didn't mean anything anymore. There were so many people in the manor, and the girl was so angry at the fact that none of them had ever once tried to protect him. Dahlia assumed that he was probably having an incredibly hard time putting up with all of this. She looked away, wondering if there was anything she could do to help him. At that moment, she suddenly saw the sign of another store nearby. It was selling potions, and she remembered the wound she had seen the other day. So the girl turned to Isaac and said that she had a little business to attend to, so she would be back very soon. She also wondered if he could wait for her at this location. It would take literally just a minute. The guy smiled and said that of course he would wait for her, so she could take her time and do whatever she needed to do. Dahlia immediately ran into this store and asked the clerk for a special ointment. When he listened to her, he said that they should have some more of it left. He also said that if she needed her scar removed, it was the best salve around. Though most young people nowadays don't even know about it, so he asked how she knew about it. The girl replied that she heard someone talking about her quite by accident, so she came to check it out. In fact, she had heard of this ointment at her previous place of employment. The Baroness had made it a necessity among the servants with her scolding, so Dahlia said with a smile on her face that she would take one, and wondered how much it would even cost. The man named a price. Then she started to look for her wallet to pay, but then in her pocket, she fumbled for this thing Carla had given her, and suggested that she could pay with it, since it was for Mr. Isaac after all. But she quickly dismissed those thoughts from her mind, for she wanted this to be something she would do for him completely on her own, not something he would still have to pay for. So the girl quickly found 2 silver coins and thought about the fact that even though she was insolvent, she was still a working woman and had money. Dahlia, with her paycheck, was more than capable of buying some ointment for Sir Isaac, so she quickly paid for what she needed. But at that moment she heard people whispering behind her. Some of the people present said that the scarf was indeed made of snow rabbit pelts, and people did not understand how this girl could have bought such an expensive thing. They assumed that she didn't buy it, for anyone could say she was a servant. Dahlia suddenly felt very uncomfortable and speculated how expensive this scarf might even be. Then one of the visitors said that she had never yet seen maids who wore scarves for 30 pieces of silver. And the girl, when she heard that price, she couldn't believe it was really true. Then one of the men, who was also involved in this conversation, suggested that maybe she had just stolen it. Dahlia was very indignant, but realized that she should just ignore them and not waste any time or energy on such useless people. At this point, she picked up her salve and heard someone suggest that she was resorting to a method that required physical intimacy in bed for her master to buy her that expensive scarf. That's when the girl couldn't stand it. She couldn't believe that they could really suggest such a thing. So as politely as possible, Dahlia turned to those people and asked them to repeat what they had just said. But the girl pretended not to understand and said that Dahlia must have gotten something mixed up, for they were talking about their own things. And at the end, she also told the maid to mind her own business and not to interfere in other people's conversations. At this very time, Isaac was walking past the crowd and turning from side to side looking for the girl. Soon he looked up and saw her right in front of him. He smiled and said that he had found her at last, for he could not see her. Dahlia was incredibly sad and couldn't say anything to him. Isaac, for his part, wondered if her case hadn't been quick enough or if she had something wrong. But the girl hid her resentment by smiling. She said that nothing had happened and that everything was fine, and that they could leave already towards the manor. Then they boarded transportation to get there as soon as possible. She sat across from Isaac. Then she held out the scarf he'd given her and the mitten, telling him to take it. She also added that from now on, he can no longer give her such lavish gifts, no matter how much he wants to. Isaac took these things in surprise, and then inquired why he could not do so. The girl in turn replied that such things were not suitable for her. Others may think that she stole these gifts because she is low status, and she does not want to make life even more difficult for herself. But the man said that he actually only wants to give her luxury items. The more expensive, the better. That's his logic. Isaac also added that he thought she looked great in them. Dahlia thanked him with a smile on her face for those words and said that he was too kind. But nevertheless, she already wanted to explain her point of view. Then Isaac waved his head and said that he didn't need to. He understood perfectly well what she wanted to say. So from now on, he would be more prudent not to embarrass her again. But at that moment, the man reached out and started pulling something out of his pocket, asking that she take it. It was the only thing for last, and he wouldn't do it again. Then Isaac took a small box out of his pocket, saying that this thing was inexpensive. He would promise it to her. Dahlia hesitated for a while. She didn't want to accept, thinking that it would be really expensive. But then she opened the box and looked at it in surprise. Inside was a beautiful ribbon, and the girl guessed. She asked if it wasn't the same ribbon that was on the bear in the store they had seen earlier. The guy smiled and said that was right. He figured it would look much better on her than that toy. Dahlia began to scrutinize her and couldn't believe that she could really be so beautiful. It has perfect tailoring and the details on the lace are amazing. The girl couldn't even believe that this ribbon was inexpensive because that's what it looks like. But she thinks it might well be something she could buy with her paycheck. And by wearing such a thing, she will no longer hear the horrible remarks that she stole it or earned it by indecent things. Then Isaac suddenly looked at her with a pitying look and asked if she really thought she couldn't take it. But the girl looked at him and smiled and said that not at all. She could do it, and thanked him, saying that she would always keep it. For a while they rode in silence, and then she remembered her surprise and asked the man if he could give her his hand for a moment. Isaac was very surprised at the request, but he did it anyway. The girl put a small jar in his hand and told him it was an ointment that healed wounds without a trace. The guy looked at her in surprise, and Dahlia said that she certainly couldn't compare it to a wonderful gift from him. But still, she wanted to give it to him as a thank you for everything. The girl also said she couldn't get that bandage on his face from that time out of her head, and thought it was likely to leave a scar there. She knows he couldn't have hurt himself so easily by stumbling, and wondered with a concerned expression on her face who had done this to him after all. She asked him to tell her the truth, whether it was the master or the mistress, or perhaps it was the Marquis himself who did it when he was in strong emotions. When she saw the expression on Isaac's face change, she said it was definitely him, because she knew he was capable of something like that. Dahlia took his hand in hers and told him that if ever anyone ever hurt him, or if he just wanted someone to be there to help him, she asked that he call out to her. When Isaac heard this, he was very surprised and looked at her. He could not believe that she was really saying that. Dahlia also said that she didn't really know how she could help him, but she still wanted him to call her. Sometimes even the mere presence of a person can help a lot. Isaac smiled then and asked why he had to do that. Was it so that she could grab him and run away together? But the girl said in all seriousness that's exactly what it was. When things get tough, he shouldn't keep it all inside. The guy hesitated for a while. Then he asked if she really wanted to do it. Dahlia said in all seriousness that of course she would. He also asked if she could really run away with him. She replied that she would do it for him. They were silent for a while. Then Isaac asked why she was so worried about him. Dahlia, smiling, said it was all because she liked him, and it's natural to worry about someone you care about. That's why she says that. The man didn't say anything to that. He just looked at her and couldn't believe it was true, and she, in turn, closing her eyes, said that besides, all good people deserve to be happy, and he was just that, so she couldn't leave him to suffer. When she said those words, Isaac couldn't hold back his emotions. He even cried, the words she had said about liking him playing in his head. In the evening, when they finally got home, the boy lay on his bed, absolutely happy. He looked at that little jar of ointment and couldn't believe it had actually happened to him. Also, Isaac did not believe that ordinary people who had almost no money always showed such generosity. He quickly pushed those thoughts away from him, though, realizing that it made no difference. He had Dahlia for that right now. He thought about the fact that, just like she said, he was a good kid who deserved to be happy. And with these thoughts, the boy fell asleep. However, there was a voice in his head that told him that he himself knew it wasn't all true. He's not even close to being good. That voice asked, had he already forgotten what he had done to someone? He had just killed his own mother with his own hands. Renee, that was the name of the woman who gave birth to Isaac. She was a girl of easy virtue among the aristocrats who did whatever she wanted in her world. However, that was before she tangled with Duke Jugendschultz and incurred the wrath of his lawful wedded wife. Pursued by assassins, she found refuge in the brothels of the city of Anka. Rena, whose world shattered that day, found herself at rock bottom. She decided to raise Isaac until he came of age, and then send him to the Duke. The mother forbade the child to go outside, for they could still be pursued by the murderers. She would not let him go near the windows, because they might pass by and see him. So they had to endure a terrible life in Anka until Isaac came of age. At that time, the woman liked to take all her anger and fatigue out on her own children, in particular, and on his older half-brother, namely Hoover. For Ren, Children were nothing more than simple tools with which she could pursue her goals. It was a means for social advancement and revenge by someone to give orders to and take out their anger on after a hard day. The way Rihanna got angry, his brother's entire body was always covered in bruises and scars that didn't even have time to heal. Rena would often raise her voice and beat him as he screamed and cried for someone to come and save him. And when those sounds echoed through their tiny house in Anka, all Isaac could do was huddle in a ball and wait for them to subside. It was impossible to change current circumstances or try to escape from them. In his position, the lad could only learn to get rid of all useless emotions and feelings, thus making himself as small as he could, and completely erasing himself from such moments. When it was over, his brother would come and talk to him about it. Hoover explained that he knew he didn't have to hide like that. When Mommy does it to him, she never touches him anyway, so he doesn't have to be afraid. Hoover said with pity in his voice that the lad was different from him. His very body was of great value to his mother, and the boy didn't even hesitate to say that he really envied Isaac, all because he could live a relatively peaceful life, knowing that his mother wouldn't beat him up. After saying that, he got up and said that there was still bread on the table, so he should eat. And Hoover himself had some laundry to do. There was always anger and resentment in Isaac's half-brother's voice, but that didn't stop him from looking out for his brother, whom he was very jealous of. Even if it was all just to lessen the likelihood of him facing Ren's wrath, he really was Isaac's only protector, the person who cared for him. That's why when he received the letter from the Duke, he could no longer hide like before. Mother was furious when she heard about it. The woman couldn't believe that he was only going to take the boy without her herself. The woman didn't understand how the Duke could do this to her. Hoover was in a bad place at the time. He advised his mother to calm down. After all, if it was in the letter, they could wait a little longer, and he would surely take them too. But Mother got angry then, and asked why he thought he would take them away. She didn't understand how he could put them together like that, as if they were on the same level. And at that moment she slapped Hoover hard. Isaac, who was watching this, could not stand it, and even fell to the ground, while his mother continued to shout, asking him if he really thought he had any chance of even setting foot there. Hoover kept yelling. He apologized to his mother and asked her to stop doing that. However, Rena wondered if he still thought he and Isaac were the same. He was pathetic about the likeness of a boy who didn't even know his father, and at that moment, she hit him even harder time after time. Soon, everything was quiet. Mother went to the fireplace and took the iron stick with which the wood was usually stirred, and said that she had had enough of him. Hoover, in his turn, after a severe beating, lay on the floor and could not move. If Isaac had done nothing at that moment, Hoover would have been dead. He stared at his brother for a while as he spoke words of help with only his lips. It was then that Isaac realized he could no longer just sit. He stood up. He went to the table where the bread knife was and stuck the knife in his mother's back before she could stab her son. Rena screamed loudly and fell to the ground. When she saw who had done it, she couldn't believe her eyes, because she had so much faith in Isaac and thought he was different. The woman was still moving for a while, trying to survive somehow, but it was no use. A few minutes later, her body lay bloody and breathless on the floor of Hoover's bedroom. The guy himself, who was very beaten up, was finally able to smile. Tears of happiness flowed down his eyes, and he said that it was finally over. Hoover turned to Isaac, who had done so, and said it was now over. But the guy at that moment was absolutely destroyed and completely lost. He killed the woman with his own hands, who gave him life. Ever since then, she has been stalking him, keeping him up at night. The woman keeps asking in a mocking tone if he can really call himself a good man, and this joyous night was no exception. Isaac said that Dahlia really liked him, so he didn't care what she said now. But Rena replied that it was only because she didn't know what kind of person he really was. But at this point, the guy couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed her hand and told her that the version of Isaac that both she and the girl liked was who he really was. He was no longer the little boy who allowed himself to be manipulated and wanted nothing more than to disappear from this world. He will no longer be haunted by nightmares about his mother and despair over what happened in the past. He will not on this day come to that final end. He will no longer put up with all of this. When he said this, his mother laughed and asked if he really truly believed it, but that was insanely naive of him. She crawled closer to him and told him that when he knows full well that his father threw her out, Dahlia will be absolutely the same. She will certainly throw him out and will not spare his tender feelings. Rena said that this girl would get rid of Isaac the same way his father had gotten rid of her himself. At this point, Isaac could stand it no longer. He suddenly woke up in a cold sweat and was breathing heavily. It took the guy a while to come to his senses and realize where he was, and that it was all unreal. His hands were shaking very badly because of the past nightmare. He tried to calm down. However, he couldn't. Now his whole body was trembling. He couldn't get away from this horrible nightmare. Isaac began to think about Dahlia. He pictured her silhouette in his head and began to calm down a little. He hoped that she would like him a little more, so that he could finally live a peaceful life. Tears welled up in his eyes because he couldn't help but remember his mother's silhouette and her terrible words. Since then, it had been a full week since she and Sir Isaac had visited the city. Dahlia, of course, had gotten into a tremendous amount of trouble over it. And just like that, she was back to her normal life as a cleaning lady. However, there was also one piece of big news. A future husband for Lady Carla had finally been chosen. He was a notorious man who was nicknamed the Earl of Swine. The other maids were constantly gossiping about his double chin, and how his belly bulged out and how his thighs were twice as thick as his maiden waist. But the problem wasn't really his looks and overweight issues, rather his disgusting tendency to touch women inappropriately. His chosen victims were almost always the younger maids, and as soon as they got pregnant, they were slowly kicked out of the estate just for the hell of it. Some rumors even went so far as to say that he was drinking them with poisonous mixtures to avoid future problems for himself. Dahlia, when she heard about all these rumors, had no way of understanding how someone could do something like that, as if it was nothing. Her roommate, who was trying to sleep, replied that it's all because the victims are maids. They are helpless and defenseless. To such people, all servants are no different from stray animals on the street. They mean nothing. People believe that they have no right to anything, and should only obey them unconditionally. Dahlia thought at that moment about how nice it would be if she could just ask Isaac. She knows he would have given a wise yet cautious answer. She wondered what they could even do in this unfavorable reality, how they could survive if everyone around them wanted different things. But the girl quickly pushed such thoughts away from her, realizing that she was continuing to make it look like something it was not. After all, Sir Isaac is a member of a noble family, and someone like her dare not even think that they are on equal footing.